seem like a lot of really nice people. It's the only kind of people I really kind of resonate with. I think it's a self-explanatory song. Heaven help us if we ever grow tired of love. Stand beside us till the light shines from above. We can be anything that we want. We can be anything that we want. Even if you got us, it'll be just in the nick of time. Please remind us how we grow weary from time. But we can be anything that we want. We can be anything that we want. We can be anything that we want. If love should ever find us out here lost on this star, perhaps she'll remind us just who we really are. You can be anything that you want. Yeah, we can be anything that we want. We can be anything that we want. Heaven help us if we ever grow tired of love. Heaven help us if we ever grow tired of love. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. That was great. I have brief readings I'd like to share to open up our conversation or our sermon. Taken from the book Earth Prayers. And this is a poem from Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be. I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. And now we have Marcus Gordon.
Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm very pleased to be with you here in this setting. And also to admit that I put myself in something of a challenging situation, that I much prefer sitting out there listening to a sermon and then criticizing what the person said or didn't say or how they said it. And I'm not sure this is a good idea. Anyway, when Mark asked me if I'd like to speak, I for some reason jumped at the chance and I said, what should I talk about? And he said, you know, it could be any topic I wanted, so long as it was appropriate and interesting. Which obviously narrows the spectrum quite a bit, because I could think of a lot of things that were very interesting that were not at all appropriate. And I could think of a few things that were appropriate that were not at all interesting. So I went with the topic, higher education and the environmental crisis. And I went with that topic because it's important. And I pray to God that it is interesting and appropriate. So Mark also said that I had 20 minutes, but he strongly recommended 15. I don't know if he says that to everyone or if he just said that to me. I don't know if that's really a reflection on me or a reflection on you, but I'm going to try to honor that. And he said that any mention of God was optional. And I just want to point out that I've already mentioned God, and I'm just getting started here. Most people assume that the environmental crisis is a result of ignorance, and that more education is the solution. And that's partly true, but it's not altogether true. Most of the environmental destruction that's done is done by very well-educated people. And uneducated people contribute very little damage to the environment. This suggests that there's something wrong with the way we educate ourselves. For most of the last 900 years, higher education has been rare, Christian, and important. By which I mean almost nobody went to college. Colleges were explicitly Christian, and they were important because they provided the personnel, but also the rationale for the most important cultural institution of the time, which was the church. When Europeans came to what they called the New World, they brought with them this form of higher education. From the founding of Harvard University in 1636 up until the early part of the 20th century, higher education in the United States was rare, Christian, and important. Today, higher education is ubiquitous, secular, and important, but it's important for a very different reason. Today, universities are important because they serve not the church, but business. Facebook, Apple, and Google owe their existence to Stanford, Harvard, and MIT. And the same is true in a somewhat more complicated way with ExxonMobil, Raytheon, and Bank of America. The modern university is a complex institution with many functions, but its primary function today is economic, not religious. there's a tendency to see this shift from rare Christian and important to ubiquitous, secular, and important for business as progress. And in some respects it is, but it's a much more complicated story. Religions can be and have been dangerous, but extreme secularism is just as dangerous as extreme religiousness. Indeed, it's more dangerous. The primary danger of too much of the wrong kind of religiousness is violence against other people. Religions can and often do inspire generosity, compassion, and peace, but they can also inspire hatred, intolerance, and violence. The bloody wars of 17th century Europe were the result of too much of the wrong kind of religions, as were the Crusades and the pogroms. Religion is not the only source of violence and bloodshed, but historically it was a leading cause. But secularism is also a mixed bag. As it turns out, we humans can fight about race, power, natural resources, especially water, oil, coal, just as easily as we can fight about religion. The American Revolutionary War was not fought for religious reasons. The Civil War was not fought for religious reasons. The First and Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, probably the Gulf Wars were not fought for religious reasons. Tens of millions, indeed hundreds of millions of people have been killed for non-religious reasons. But the primary danger of secularism is not violence against other people, at least not directly, but violence against the planet and other species. When we assume that the world is not sacred and that economic growth is both natural and good, and when we worship wealth, we're likely to poison and pollute the oceans, the skies, and the earth, and to drive millions of species into extinction in order to grow the economy. Universities are officially agnostic when it comes to religious beliefs, but they're not agnostic when it comes to the need for economic growth. And it's economic growth that is driving climate change and species extinction. There's a second and related danger associated with secularism, which is the loss of personal meaning. The secular worldview contends that life is an accident and devoid of meaning. From the secularist position, there's no cosmic memory, there's no purpose, there's no intentionality, there are no values. Things just happen, and nothing really matters. Having money and lots of things or lots of experiences can distract us from this so-called truth, but in the end, nothing matters. The idea that happiness and meaning can be purchased is, of course, good news for business. But it's not true, and it's not good news for the planet. And it's also not Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Taoist. Universities tend to perpetuate the idea that finally human life is meaningless and that wealth is a good thing. So let me just summarize here. We've exchanged one form of higher education, which was problematic, for another form of higher education, which is also problematic, but in a different and much more dangerous way. And we call that progress. So the good news, and I'm hoping this is what makes my remarks appropriate in a religious setting, the good news is that we're not forced to choose between these two types of higher education. We're not forced to choose between Christian supernaturalism and modern secularism. We're not forced to choose between being of service to the Christian church and the global economy. There are other forms of higher education, or there could be. What if we restructured higher education to be in service of the earth, not the Christian church and not the global economy? And what if we taught in these universities and colleges that all of us are part of nature and that our lives are intrinsically valuable, and that we can only increase the value of our lives by contributing value to the lives of others. The great Christian theologian John Cobb once said, "There's very little difference in being of service to God and being of service to God's creation. In fact, we might be more faithful to God by being faithful to God's creation, including other human beings, than by being faithful to some abstract understanding of what the divine is." And the late Catholic theologian Thomas Berry put it even more dramatically. He said, "Every species is a unique incarnation of the divine. And so when a species goes extinct, the world is deprived of another incarnation of the divine." And today, species are going extinct at 1,000 times the normal background rate. Every day, we lose dozens, if not hundreds, of species. Higher education was once rare, Christian, and important to the church. Now it is ubiquitous, secular, and important to business. What I'm proposing is, what if higher education were ubiquitous, religious, and important in a way that was good for the earth? A very different form of higher education. Care for creation is a religious idea. It's a Christian idea, but it's also a Jewish, Muslim, indigenous, Buddhist, Taoist, Hindu idea. But it's a religious idea. Environmentalism as a secular concept, or sustainability as a secular concept, or worse yet, resource management as a secular concept, is not enough. We need a religious commitment to caring for the earth and all that dwells within. And we need to see ourselves as religious beings surrounded by other religious beings, swimming in a sea of meaning and value. Remaking higher education along the lines I'm suggesting would change everything. It would change what's taught, it would change who teaches, it would change who our educational leaders are. It would even change college athletics. The core of the university. We cannot pretend that we really care about the earth while we're flying students across from one state to the other state to play against each other. Their carbon footprint will outlast their weekend victory or defeat by centuries. My point is this, that a college or university committed to the idea that the earth is sacred and that we have a collective responsibility to care for creation does not look like a college or university committed to the idea that we must grow the economy and engage in research for its own sake. It looks very different. I realize that this is a very radical proposal, but we are living in very dangerous times, and dramatic change is called for. And historically, religious people have not been shy about personal sacrifice for the greater good. It was religious people who set up hospitals and orphanages. It was religious people who set up colleges and universities. It was religious people who fought against slavery and who fought for civil rights. And it was religious people, to a lesser extent, who stood up for the rights of gays and transgender people. Religion has been, and must be again, a powerful force for good in the world. We must not shy away from our responsibility as religious people to transform our educational institutions so that instead of being a force for environmental destruction and personal meaninglessness, they are a source for healing and meaning. Of course, higher education should be affordable and accessible, but it should also be meaningful and healing. Corporations can afford train their own employees. That's not a public responsibility. The task of the public is to teach young people that the world is sacred and that we have a sacred responsibility to care for it, and that our lives are meaningful, and that we can only increase the meaning of our lives by increasing the meaning of other people's lives. So let me conclude with a quote from the great American poet Wendell Berry, who's already been quoted here. He says, "We have lived our lives by the assumption that what was good for us would be good for the world. We have been wrong. We must change our lives so that it will be possible to live by the contrary assumption, that what is good for the world will be good for us. And that requires that we make the effort to know the world and learn what is good for it. So let us commit ourselves to glorifying the earth in all of its many inhabitants. Amen."
And in sort of celebration of that, our next song will be accompanied by Joseph. And I ask you to really take your voices where your spirit might be, because this is a song you know, and if you don't know it, you will remember it while everybody else is singing it. And I just invite you to sing loud and sing like you mean it. So Joseph will do a quick intro, and I'll try to kick this off and just follow in. I don't want this to sound so. Yeah, stand. Oh. So the lyrics that they have here, that first line is just sort of there, but start with the second line. Actually, the first line is the intro, and the second one you take out. So just to be sure, otherwise you're going to be singing a different song. This land is mine, from California to New York Island, from Redwood Forest to Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of verdant deserts, and all around me a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me. The sun comes shining, then I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling. The voice was chanting as the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is mine. for the last time.
This land was joining, then I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling, the voice kept chanting, and the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.
When the sun can shine. When the sun can
Shining, there I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling, the voice was chanting, and the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.
Thank you. Our religious community is only as strong as the members and friends who dedicate themselves to its health and well-being. We ask any who come here seeking an open and welcoming community to give generously, as you are able, to ensure Beacon lives and remains strong and welcoming for all. And today and the 4 Sundays of the month, the Community Action has selected our community partner as the Sage Home, which is printed on the back of your service. Just for your information, for the first 4 Sundays, all checks and cash contributions over $350 will be allocated to the operational budget, will be presented to this service. So, we have someone to help us do offertory?